Hayden Howard, Executive Vice President of CompassData and board member of the Compass family of companies. Privileged to have you on the Geospatial Index.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Excited to talk to you again. And yeah, appreciate it.
In the lead up to this, I heard that you've got a few stories to tell actually from some time you spent surveying in Australia. Tell us a bit about some of the projects you're involved in.
Yeah, so Australia is just one of the projects or one of the areas that I've been, and that was a while ago. And I got a few key moments that I can remember from years ago when I was there. And then we've been there many times since, including even last month through our affiliate AccuWorth that's in Czech Republic. But yeah, I guess going back to like maybe the story I was telling you, there was a project that we were doing there. And it basically was like fly into Sydney, then go to Adelaide, and then
That's where I'm from.
Yeah, awesome. Adelaide's beautiful. Yeah. And then just drive all around, right? Like I can't even remember all the places, but it was drive a lot of places. At first we had like a camper van that we were living out of just to keep costs low. And then basically we got to a point, I think it was Exmouth was like our last survey, which there's an interesting story about all these places, but I'll kind of focus on maybe the funner one that we already talked about. And then from there to get up to Darwin, as you know, it's difficult, right? Like you have to like pre-plan, have water and gas, or at least that's how it was when I did it. I think this was in like 2007 or 6 or something like that. So we ended up flying up there, and it was like it was just we're doing the whole country, so it's not like we knew we were going to be there on this date. We just knew we were going to have to fly up there at some point. So we flew up there, and I should mention I was there with one other guy. Like we were there for 4 months. Chris Schillinger was a surveyor with me, and he and I were going around and doing all this kind of stuff. So flew up there and landed, and we're like, oh, cool, we're in Darwin. And then there was like a super 8 car, super whatever, like a race car thing up there, and it was like
V8 supercars.
V8 supercars, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and it was like the busiest time of the year to be up there. And we showed up and got out off the airplane, went to the rental car place, and there was no cars, and this was before like phones with apps and everything. And we were like trying to figure out where we could stay, calling around, no hotels. We ended up staying at a hostel, and then we figured out we had to rent Vespas, right, if we wanted to get the job done. So we went and figured out where to get Vespas. We had a schedule that was pretty flexible, but we still were, we're waking up early every day, working hard, driving, surveying, keep moving. And we ended up like surveying everything on Vespas with backpacks and our gear hanging out the back. And it's a wild place. And I don't know if you've been there, but when I was there, it was like traveling back in time. It was like going to the Wild West in terms of culturally and all sorts of different things, but it was super fun. And there's a few more stories, but not geospatial related.
I think this is hilarious because I'm starting to wonder if every geospatial career involves use of scooters at some point, because I had a summer job, my first ever GIS job at the Salisbury City Council, which is this sort of satellite suburb or city north of Adelaide. And we put differential GPS antennas in the front mudguard and had a little, entry pad sitting mounted on the handlebars.
Yeah.
And there was a team of 3 that rode on these little scooters in the height of summer, like December, January, February, the whole footpath and road network of the city of Salisbury, getting all the footpath and road faults.
That sounds fun.
It seems like all of us have to do our time on scooters.
Yeah. I mean, you're maybe the only other person I've heard that from.
Okay.
Scooter story.
Maybe it's in Australia.
Yeah, maybe it is Australia. Yeah, but that was wild for sure. It's a good experience. We got the job done, and one other thing I remember from when we were there. So we set up a base station. And in Australia, like people are so nice. That was also a problem in terms of like being younger and like driving and getting somewhere and being tired and wanting to go to bed, but meeting so many people and like going and doing what Australians do at night, like every night.
Especially in Darwin.
Yeah, well, everywhere.
Never
But
have
that
so many Long Island iced teas been drunk than when I was in Darwin. Oh my God.
yeah. But we set up a base station outside of the hostel that we had to stay at. And I was telling my middle daughter this story last night with all the detail of what happened at night, which was fun but crazy. But anyways, we set it up outside. We'd been setting base stations up while we go around and survey and do our rover, and then go back at the end of the day like a car battery. And like in a lot of places, you really need someone to watch your base station, right? So it doesn't get stolen or messed with or something like that. And we hadn't had that problem. But when we got back, I think from the first day outside the hostel, we put it in an area with open sky. It was gone,
Oh
right?
man.
And what happened was somebody came by, and somebody from the hostel that worked there that had met us the night before, obviously like super nice, made a good connection with them. They didn't know, we told them it was out there, but they didn't know like what this person was going to do with it. So they brought it inside, and
Oh
they're like,
God.
hey, we don't worry, we have it inside here. And so like that whole day of survey was scratched because our base station had moved. But
Shit.
yeah, yeah.
I'm think it's very easy to forget that there are people outside of geospatial and surveying when I run this podcast and talk with all these expert guests. So for those who have wandered into this podcast from the outside world, what's a base station and what's a rover?
Yeah. So there's different ways to do it, but in that certain case, right? So there's let me explain it this way. So um a rover is what you would use to go out and survey a very precise location, right? You got GPS, GNSS, like coming down from space, and it's pinging you at 1 a second, depending on your settings. And it takes into account like stratosphere interference and all that kind of stuff. And then when you're on a rover, you're moving more often, right? So, and it depends on how far you are from base stations and accuracy and all this other stuff. But a base station is something that is sitting in a fixed location doing the same thing as the rover, right? It's collecting the same data from the same satellites at the same time. And that base station is going to be used to post process, right, the positions of your rover throughout the day. So if you're getting positions all day at a rover, right, and you're moving, then the base station is getting positions all day. But longer, you can say, okay, here's the errors in the location that they receive. And the way it was explained to me really early on was that base stations, we should really say, right, is like, imagine you have like a rope around a horse's neck or something, right?
Yeah.
And it's moving around, right? And if you have one base station, it's going to be like it can come towards you, it can come this way and go that way, all that kind of stuff. But if you have a good triangulation, or the more ropes you get around it, so the more base stations that you get around where you're doing your survey, the easier it is to constrain that location, right, or that horse.
That's a
Right.
nice I can get that. I like physical examples. I can put that together in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so in a lot of places these days that we go survey, there's enough base stations that are continually operating, like fixed base stations, like the Coors base station, Navco, SOPAC, a lot of different base stations out there where they're fixed, and you don't have to really. I mean, you do take into account how far they are from where you're serving, but in this case in Darwin, back then it was like, all right, well, we know that we have to, and I can't remember the accuracy requirements back then, but it was probably like 30 centimeters or a foot, right? Which
Yeah.
is like pretty automatic anywhere you go these days. But back then it was like, okay, there's a base station here in Darwin, and then there's one in Alice Springs, right? And that's a long ways. And if you have a rope
Wow.
that long,
That's a hell of a long way.
that horse is moving. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah.
Wow. So there's many different forms of surveying. One of them that regular folk might maybe be more aware of is so-called cadastral surveying, where you have a high accuracy measurement of the boundary of your property. Is that what you were doing around Australia, or are you doing?
Yeah, no, that was definitely not what we were doing. What we've been doing for I guess 30 years. It's our 30th year in business, and when we started doing this, it was a couple years after we started because we had a different company that led us into this. But is and we do more than what I'm going to tell you right now. But like what we were doing in Australia was ground control to enhance the accuracy of satellite, like space-based optical imagery, right?
Wow.
So we're finding features on the ground that you can see, like your background right now, right? It's perfect, the contrast, because you got black and white, and you got corners, right? And if you were to say, this pixel, which is like the corner of, well, one of the corners of your buildings where it hits black, the image takes that, and if you take a satellite image, and just turn it into what you got right there, which is what that probably where that came from, satellite aerial or something like that. What happens is it creates an image, and then, and you know this, but I'll just kind of explain it for the audience. But you take an image and another image, however many, depending on like what you're trying to map, and then you tie them together, a mosaic, right? And then the spatial accuracy off the bird, right? The satellite could be, depending on the satellite back then, it was probably 20 meters. That's absolute accuracy. It could have been 30, it's a long time ago. But anyways, like the relative accuracy, if you like measure the corner of the building, it might be much closer, but the absolute spatial accuracy, which is what we were providing, needed to be much higher. So we go out and we survey a photo identifiable point, not a photo, I shouldn't say that. We survey multiple photo identifiable points on scooters in this case, and then post-process all that data, provide it to the photogrammetrists, the folks at Digital Globe at the time, which is now Maxar. And then they take that and they basically say, okay, this pixel is actually here, this
Yeah.
pixel is actually here. And you take, like, you can just think about taking I don't know, like a cloth and putting it on some kind of weird surface. And then you just move stuff around because it's 3D. So.
And you can warp the image basically to have the known places in that image at the right locations that you've surveyed.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you did this in a trip around Australia in hired camper vans and, as you said, scooters.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is crazy.
Yeah. And then we had a rental car with tents. Yeah,
This is
there's
amazing.
multiple vehicles. It was fun. Yeah.
That's like basically the awesomest camping trip that anyone could possibly do around Australia. Um, uh, so there's a hell of a lot of tough terrain to get through, especially up in the north. Did you go to Queensland?
Yeah. Yeah. We did go there.
So
Yeah.
you went to the tropics.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wish I had a map of it, but we basically went, like, we flew into Sydney and then we were there for maybe 8 hours. And then we flew to Adelaide, in which 8 hours, my buddy who I was surveying with lost his passport, which is a
Oh God.
different story. Got to Adelaide and we drove from Adelaide to, we just went along the southern border.
Did you go basically west across the Nullarbor?
Yeah.
You went to Esperance, Albany, Perth eventually.
Perth eventually, yeah. I was trying to think of the other ones. What's the big mining town there?
Uh, well, there's you go along the coast, is Port Augusta, Whyalla.
No,
I
it
mean,
wasn't
that's.
right on the coast. It's
Oh,
like
you mean Kalgoorlie? I mean, it
Kalgoorlie,
depends.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you went to
Kalgoorlie.
Gold. You went.
We were like going from town to town and bumping up a little bit, coming down, bumping up, coming down. Went to Margaret River, which was like, and I had lived in Australia a couple years before this and went to university, probably more than a couple years, and had seen the East Coast and lived in Rockhampton, which I think I had mentioned to you, which is
Speaking
totally,
of Queensland, yeah.
yeah. Anyways, we went down there and then ended up like zigzagging all the way up to Exmouth. There's a military thing there that we were surveying on that we got kicked off of. And then we
Awesome.
explained what we were doing, and it turned out just fine. It was awesome. People were so cool down there.
You could
Uh,
have told them that you were helping them because
yeah,
their geo efforts would have become more accurate.
yeah, yeah. And then anyway, so we flew to Darwin to Alice Springs. That was like the only two flights we took. And then in Alice Springs, we surveyed there, and then we were heading towards Queensland, but surveying spots along the way. And then we found out there was an issue with the base station or something, so we actually had to go way back down to, I can't remember the town. It's been so long, but it was between um, Perth and Adelaide. So we like had to drive all the way back down somewhere, resurvey that,
Uh,
go back up, and then we drove all the way up Queensland all the way to what's the top city there?
I mean, Cairns is
Yeah, no, we
one of
went
the
Cairns and
Mackay,
then yeah, Cairns. We were at Cairns, surveyed up there.
Gladstone, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And then we ended up flying out of Brisbane. So sorry, that was a long explanation, but yeah, we literally were driving all day, every day, and then getting to locations and being like, all right, we're spent, we're gonna like we had to like upload our data and do all that kind of stuff and QC stuff, do a little post processing. And I'd say 80% of the nights when we were like, which was every night, we're like spent, we're like, we're going to be done. And then we would meet people and they'd be like, take us out and
That's a
whatever,
joke.
go to dinner at someone's mom's house or go to a bar or whatever. Right. It's such a good experience.
Good.
It's so different than my life now.
Sure. I'm glad there was some hospitality.
Yeah.
All right. So I was having some twinges of territoriality there. I mean, there's plenty of decent surveying firms I would have thought in Australia. So what was the reason that an American firm had to do this?
Yeah, great question. And this goes back kind of into our history of our company, which if it's okay, I'll dive into that a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. Hit us.
So we're in Colorado, right? And we're selling, oh, maybe I should take a step back. My dad started the company in 94. And at that time it was CompassCom and it was a Trimble buy resale company. It's like a car dealership, but for GPS equipment. And you know what Trimble is. Most people, hopefully, that listen to this will know what that is. And so we were out like in our territory selling GPS equipment in the early 90s. And the company at that time, and I might mess this up, but I think it was Orb Image, but is now Maxar, was Digital Globe. Um, we sold them some equipment, sold Bexel. They were one of our first survey customers back in the day. Well, we didn't sell them equipment, but we were talking to them. But anyways, so Maxar today was one of our first customers, right? And we as in my dad and another guy went in there and sold them equipment. And then we went up there and trained them, and it was all to survey ground control points, right? And they were pretty early on in doing this. And so spent some days with them and went out in the field, and they called us like 2 weeks later and they're like, listen, we like to sit in dark rooms and look at images. We really don't want to handle all this stuff. Can you go ahead and like take care of this for us? Right. And so we were like, absolutely. And my dad at the time, Brant Howard, he was reading a book, Cable Cowboy, which is, I don't know if you know of that. Do you know that book?
No.
Okay. It's John Malone, totally different industry, but he lives here in Colorado. As I think he is the largest landowner in the United States. I know Ted Turner, that always hits people's heads, but anyways, he had written this book about what he had done in his career and put cable in the ground and owning content and all this kind of stuff. And my dad at the time, Brant, said, hey, look, yeah, we'll go do this for you guys, but we're going to retain rights to it. right? So that we can license it, and not everyone in this industry has to go out and send people to survey every time
Yeah.
they need something. And when it's photo identifiable, like existing features, it's something that you can reuse. So anyways, we worked with Digital Globe, which is Maxar, to get that done. And then we really worked closely with them on the formatting, how to make it like easily ingestible into their system, so that, it was just not like, if you work with different surveyors, great people, but if they're doing different things and they're not specialized on this, they would maybe just throw you over a CSV or something with coordinates in it. And what we did was like kind of standardize all that, which is part of our archive, and made it really easy for them. So when they needed somebody in Australia, they didn't want to work with anyone else.
Wow.
And in the past, when they were working in Pakistan or something like that, they would maybe have a customer that required them, and maybe not just them, but other satellite companies required the company to go out and survey, and they'd say, hey, you have to work with CompassData, and we would guide them through the process, so that these guys, the photogrammetrists, remote sensing specialists, could take the data and easily plug it in, because it saved them a lot of time. Sorry, that was a long answer, but
This is amazing. So it sounds like you're like the ground control specialist for a global remote sensing capture companies. And you're sort of known in the industry for being able to properly warp their imagery, I suppose, so it's accurate. And as a result, you've been pushed to every corner of the earth.
yeah. And if not us there physically, which we've been to a lot of places, partners, right? Like we've got really good partners in all corners of the world, and multiple of them, that we've worked with for a long time, which is another fun part about the job. Because when you need, 200 points in Afghanistan, I can grow a pretty good beard, but not blend in, close enough. So, but yeah, we're, um, I'd like to think that we are the trusted provider for that kind of stuff. There's other people out there that do it. But historically, I mean, we're the commercial provider of that kind of data.
Yeah, it's a fascinating niche. And like because in going back to the Geospatial Index, I've got a subindex for sort of the legacy remote sensing companies, which are basically the defense primes. Even Boeing and Thales do remote sensing, so they're in that subindex. Then I've got another one for new space and Earth observation SPACs, because there's been like a massive flourishing, basically since SpaceX, of smaller CubeSats really doing Earth observation. You don't really think of what else that means. You just think of the satellite constellations, but it also means work for companies like CompassData. It's a really
Yeah,
interesting niche to hear of in the surveying industry. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, as far as like listening to your podcast and understanding different guests, and I don't know, some of the difficulties in some of those new small sats. I shouldn't even say new, because they're not, right. But years ago when they were new, I love it. Awesome. Put them up there, and it's a totally different world, right? The star trackers, the accuracy, like the business people, the products that they kick out of it. If you're coming into it without a background on it, there's things that they don't know, that they learn along the way, or they maybe don't think is important, and it's just been interesting to like kind of work through that with folks that have you know funding elsewhere. They're just like, hey, we're gonna throw a satellite up there and go do stuff, and they're like, okay, and then they finally find out it's not accurate enough, and how do we fix this? So it's funny, because we started, from the ground up, where a lot of other people start from space down to ground, and so we kind of can bridge that gap. um but yeah, I don't know. I
No,
probably got a little bit there, but
I'm fascinated. I mean, I have to take the opportunity to get a bit more detail about what a ground station is, because I think I've actually come across, effectively, they look like QR codes or finish line flags for a car race. These massive shapes, like black and white tessellated shapes that are put on the ground in some places to act as these edges that you can, I guess, rectify an image against. Is that what's involved? Sometimes you actually have to put down these points as part of your surveys, or do you always find natural features?
Yeah, so I'll explain this, and I'm glad you said it that way, because even just talk like everyone knows what I'm saying. But to me, and I think to most of the industry, ground station is actually like a downlink station, right? So it's completely different than what we do. So as far as terminology, so satellites are flying, and then they're downlinking data to ground stations, right? There's places in Norway, um, uh, MODs, military, government agencies have that, and they have contracts with different satellite companies to download that, right? And that is totally different than like ground control points or checkpoints or accuracy verification points, or like the stuff that we do. But as far as like the ground control points, there's different features of those, right? So there's the photo identifiable ground control points. Um, and that's a feature, like I explained, behind your head, where you can see exactly where it is, and you go out and you pick it. And there's a lot of uh, more detail to that, which I can go into if you want me to, like in terms of what's a good one for a different sensor. And we productize that, right? Like,
Hell yes, I'd love as much detail as we can get.
okay,
I feel like this
yeah,
is now the
cool.
ground station episode.
Yeah, yeah. So, ground control points, that we survey for optical imagery, starting back when we started, it was, all right, what feature can we see in a pixel that is 1 meter, right? Right. So 1 meter GSD, ground sample distance. So that, like, throw accuracy out of your mind, right? It's just like, what does a 1 meter pixel look like? It's like if I took the image I'm looking at you right now and I somehow turned it down to whatever,
1 square meter
uh,
resolution.
like 420p
Yep,
or
yep, 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 yep.
be really pixelated. So the pixel on the ground is represents 1 meter, right? So what can you see in 1 meter? You can see a big, uh, beautifully mowed lawn that's grass, right, next to a
Yep.
concrete sidewalk that it's a driveway, right? And so that contrast is where you would survey that point. And for a meter pixel, like with what we would provide to someone that was doing rectification, it would be like, all right, so you need something that's, you know, at least 1/3 the accuracy of that, right? So 30 centimeters, something like that, right? So we survey something back in the day, and I'm probably messing the math up as I'm discussing this, but anyways, you would survey something that's more accurate in terms of its spatial location than the pixel itself, right? And so
Yep.
when you say click, that pixel right there is not the coordinate that was, came from the bird, the satellite. It's actually this one, and it might be a delta of 20 meters. It would shift it over, right? So you could see that feature in a satellite space-based image, right? So now let's move down to aerial, right? So aerial, you're getting higher resolution, and therefore you need a finer point, right? Because now let's think about, I mean, that's probably a terrible example that I just gave you, but let's think that that grass is really overgrown, right? And then the concrete is old and crumpled, and it's like dark, and it's very similar to the color of the grass from something that's a 1 meter pixel, maybe 2 or 3 meter pixel from space. Now you're looking at a 30 centimeter pixel, right? And so if you're trying to get a point that's more accurate spatially, that actually makes a difference for how to move that pixel in the entire mosaic over, to that, then you have to think about the feature, right? So the feature needs to be sharper. So it might be something like a concrete corner on an asphalt thing. So these are photo identifiable. We had a lot of customers like in the Bing days that I know Jordan talked about, where they had requirements to go like, hey, we want paint stripes, which isn't great for something like long lasting because they could change the paint, from year to year. But they wanted something that, when you look at it from the image and we survey and we say, hey, this is within 10 centimeters, there's no shadow from the grass, that causes that contrast to go over in their imagery, as an example.
All these details are amazing. I mean, like all GIS students in their first year, they will all, georeference an image. And it just reminds me of looking for those, points in the topographic data, that you might be lining the image up with. But it's interesting to hear how a professional does it, and the sort of demands from these kind of clients.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, it's like the nice thing about working with these guys for so long, especially in the beginning of these programs, right? Is we think of these things together. Like it's less of a demand, and it's more like, hey, if this is what we want to do, right? If we're going to travel to Darwin and ride around on scooters to make an image more accurate or a mosaic, we got to think about these details. So
was it just for the cities? Like, was it an imagery campaign from, I guess, Digital Globe just for Darwin, and that's why you went to Darwin? Or because like you started to talk, because there's so many ways directions to go in with this, but you talked about resolution.
Let me really quick, because I know I took too long on my explanation. Let me wrap up that, right? So photo identifiable, spent way too much time on that, different resolutions. There's LiDAR, right? So there's LiDAR checkpoints, and those have to do with, verification and validation. So for USGS and stuff, they have different requirements to say, okay, when you do your accuracy tests on it, you need different land classes, you need trees, you need urban, you need different stuff. So you go out and survey different kind of features. Some of them are photo identifiable, so they can use them with imagery if they go with it. There's targets, right? So if we go to a project that's 100 square miles in an oil field, right? There's not going to be photo ID. So we go out and we lay targets on the ground and we coordinate that with the flyer before they fly. We survey those. Those can be chevrons. They can be bucket lids.
I think that's what I was talking about before.
Yeah. I just took too much time to explain.
No, it's so good.
Yeah. And then there's targets for SAR base, which not many people have done, but it's like, Philip, our licensed surveyor, years ago when we were testing out SAR stuff with Airbus.
This is synthetic aperture radar.
Yeah. So that they can get very accurate locations because they're precise ephemeris on their dual satellites with the TerraSAR, right? So much more accurate than you can with optical. So we were testing out, can we do remotely sense ground control? So we set out targets that we went and had cut from metal, and then we measured, we worked really closely with these guys to understand what direction the satellites were coming at what time, and he and I were out in the red rocks, setting these things up, looking up, and we were watching them fly over from way high up, 3 a.m. in the morning. So that's kind of the gamut. There's more to it. Sorry it takes so much time.
This is crazy. Yeah. This is the life of a ground control point surveyor. Okay. So where can we've got a few extra points to get through, and I think it's good to cover those as well, as much as I'd like to spend the rest of the time getting ever more detail about this niche in the surveying profession. I guess if I could have one more sentence just about the selection of these locations. So it sounds like you didn't have a regular grid of ground control points that you surveyed the precise location of every 100 kilometers, and you had a 100 kilometer grid across the whole of Australia. It seems like you were selecting these points. Were you responsible for selecting the locations? Were you told to go to these locations by the client?
Yeah. So for Australia, in I've got so many different projects and examples of what you just brought up, but for Australia specifically, I'm pretty sure that was for a program called CitySphere, right? And so they had picked, I think it was like I don't know if it was CitySphere, but anyways, I'll use that as an example because it's relevant to this. So they had a client, and CitySphere was one of them, and this might have been a different project, but they said, hey, we have this many cities around the globe that we want to map, right? And so here's the area, here's the population. They had a client, and they would say to rectify this to an accuracy that we need to have. We determined together, like, hey, if we're going to travel all the way out there, we need to do at least 8 to 10 points. Talk back and forth, like, while we're there, we might as well get more. Might have been 15 to be able to rectify the scene, and then also add or keep points back to check the accuracy of them, right? So
okay, but for the scene, you don't want to if the scene's like 100 kilometers high and 10 kilometers wide, you don't want to have all your ground control points in the the southeastern corner. You need to have them spread across fairly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many times I wish I could point at your background, but no one can see it.
I'm just gonna remove myself from.
let's say space-based, right? Satellite imagery, 2 images will easily cover Darwin.
Yeah.
Right. So if it was aerial or drone, you're talking about so many more, right?
Yeah.
And you think about taking 2 boards and not pieces of paper, and you put them on top of each other, and they're not right, and then you adjust them together.
Yeah.
And you're talking about 8 points. So there was
8
some
points. Okay.
there was some discussion back and forth before methodology, and so they gave us a spec, right? And they said, like, hey, we need them in these general areas. And then we got the source imagery that they were rectifying.
Yep.
Right. And it might have been the source at the time, but we knew, it was recent, and then they would send it to us. And based on what we call centroids, right, we would say, okay, we need 8. So we're going to do like a, I don't know, 200-meter circle here, 200 meters here.
Got you.
Here.
Distributed around the centroid of the image, of the footprint. Yeah, gotcha.
And then they would rely on us to go through and pick the points, and we'd pick alternates, and that's how it still goes today. And then we'd go out and survey them, and then they would work to take those 2 boards and put them together.
I get it. That helped, having those 2 pieces of paper. I get it now.
Good.
All right. So given there's this massive flourishing of a new Earth observation age, it seems, is there a huge growth in your business?
I think it's gonna get there. When you say new, I think of the 20 years I've been working in it. Right now, there is growth in it, right there, but there's different players in it. There's education. It kind of reminds me of getting into the drone space really early, where you had to explain to people a lot what it was, like how it could be used. So yeah, we are growing. It's good. But we're also doing a lot more than just GCPs, which is kind of what led this conversation with stories and everything. But yeah, there's a lot of space-based stuff going out there, and there's a need for accuracy, and it's just a matter of like making people understand what it is, right? So, and when I say need, not everyone needs it, right? There's relative accuracy for applications they don't need it, but yeah, like getting to the right person, explaining what it means, and then making it easier, which is something that we're working on.
So in terms of relative accuracy, I guess what you mean is if the image is used alone and not layered with other spatial data sources, then perhaps absolute accuracy via GCN is not so vital.
Not necessarily relative. So you can take a stack of images from drone or imagery or whatever, and a good buddy of mine did this in Australia years ago for a different company. And I'll put it this way. So you have a mine site, right? You have a quarry, you have a transit mix kind of company, and they have piles of things, right? And those pile coal material that people are using for landscape or whatever, they want to know the volume of the pile, right? You can go out and stack a bunch of images up and it will tie together and make a relatively accurate thing, right? I've seen it, I've done it, I've tested it. But spatially it's not accurate. But for tax reasons, at the end of the year, these people need to say, this is how much inventory I have at my location compared to what I've sold, right? And so they don't care where it is in the world.
Yeah.
They don't care at all. Like
Oh my God, you're sounding like a CAD person now. Yeah.
say CAD.
CAD, that's
Oh
that's
yeah,
the usual problem with CAD data. Yeah,
yeah. I am not. So it was a learning experience for me too. But it was. I mean, they don't care. They just want to say what is
yeah.
the cubic yards of this, and you
Gotcha.
can obtain that by multiple images. But
Okay.
yeah, the accuracy comes into play with a lot of different applications. A lot of the Bay Area stuff, like with what they got going on in apps and other people I've seen briefly on your podcast, which was super interesting. Then federal work, right? Standards. And then a lot of people just want to know where that pixel is, DOD, like that kind of stuff, which I've heard a lot of interesting conversations and tidbits, which I'm going to go back and listen to from your other guests. But yeah, accuracy is when you need the control piece of it.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So yeah, ultimately I came to you from Jordan Resonay when he talked about the massive campaign, I think for 70 3D cities for Bing Maps and something like 40 cities with Street Side, which is their or Microsoft's version of Street View. So what did CompassData have to do with this campaign?
Yeah. So we were the ground control provider for them, and sorry, I keep telling long stories because there's so much more behind it. But Vexel was one of our first customers before they were being Maps, and we were working with them. Before that happened, then that happened. Met a lot of good people, and oddly enough, I just met Jordan recently at a Maps meeting. We were like sharing stories, and we didn't even like maybe we crossed paths, but we never sat down together. But anyways, there was a guy there named Michael Wright, and he's like, all right, we have this big program that's starting up. And he was in charge of the ground control piece of it. And he's like, here's a section of it. We don't think that you guys can do everything because we're going to go lower 48. We're probably going to go to Europe, all this other stuff. And so I had known him for a bit, and I pulled a bunch of surveyors together. We started down in Louisiana, and I remember the planning and like how we all went out. We came back together at night and went back out, and we just crushed it. And so we would go out and survey the control for them, and we like got all of that work based on that project, right? Or that initial project where they didn't think that one company could take it. But yeah, we were going out and surveying that. For them, and then we expand that to the lower 48. And so what that meant was they had like the city locations, and then they had the lower 48, and they did the same thing in Europe a couple years later. And the control layout, which you asked about earlier, was very standardized or laid out, working together to say, okay, if it's this city shape, we need this many points. Here's the centroids. Here's the kind of features we need. Don't collect them in shadows, don't collect them in parking lots, all that other stuff. And then they had geo cells, right? So we, outside of the cities, like remote areas, they're like, we need, 1 point at every geo cell. And you have, I think it was a 2 kilometer buffer on every single one of those. And that spans all the US and later Europe. And then if you can't get it within the geocell, you got to move and go up and get it right here on the line. If you can't do
So
that, you end up.
is that because of terrain, like it's a cliff or a river, or the fact that it's just totally flat sand and there's nothing that sticks out?
Exactly. Yeah. So they had their requirements, and if everything was urban, there's photo ID everywhere, right? So this wasn't paneled. It was like they're cranking, they're flying. They're not going to wait for us to put panels down. We're going out and surveying features that they can tie the imagery to.
Okay, so the panels, yeah, okay. So you have to have time to drive out there, put the panels down for the plane to fly over and include that panel in the image. Okay.
Let me clarify. We don't have time to do that.
Okay. Right.
For this program, they're like, you got to go here. You got to find something. If you can't, then you got to put 2 in this area.
Yeah.
Right. So anyways, we surveyed, geez, I don't know how many points. I looked into this before we were going to talk last time, but it started in 2010. And then with all those points, it was thousands of points, and it turned into Europe, and then it turned into Vexel, going outside of Bing and going into Vexel imaging, which continued. And there's a whole great story about that. But yeah, we've been all over for that program and the logistics. It's fun. It's kind of like what we do. You got to get adventurous people that are willing to get outside of their bubble, right?
I love it, man. I just had this thought in my mind when you were initially talking about what you did around Australia, that suddenly we have lost all the geospatial professionals. They've all decided to go and become surveyors.
Yeah. It's funny because as I would, talking to folks that are higher up in geospatial companies these days, at least like 10, 15 years ago, when I was starting to talk to them and telling them these stories, because I was doing it more out in the field, they all had stories. They're like, man, I wish I could go back to those days, right? Where you're just out in the field and you're surveying and you're doing that kind of stuff instead of all the contracts and everything else. So
yeah. I mean, my career's been GIS, so I've always been the one sitting in an air-conditioned office, looking at the data that surveyors send in. And yeah, it's all been from doubling the size of a gas field in Queensland to talking about measuring volumes of material. I did 750 volume calculation verifications in the Bergen oil field in Kuwait for AMEC Foster Wheeler, doing battle with 3 international contractors all day long for 4.5 years. That was fun. But like what they couldn't do, because it was, the nation's, a small nation, albeit most significant asset, the Bergen oil field, responsible for like 10% of the world's oil. What they couldn't do was use drones to take a photogrammetric approach from drones to more efficiently measure those soil piles. So there was a team of surveyors for each of those contractors that was constantly climbing up over these sometimes slightly hydrocarbonish piles of dirt to measure their volume. So I had a little bit of contact. When I first arrived 2013, I did go to all 25 sludge/effluent/oil pits and survey the bund or the berm around the pits. So you got the toe and the top of the berm, so we could do accurate volume calculations, because that was a hell of a lot of earth moving in and of itself, just to push all of those bunds in. And then the remediation standard required, I think, a 25-degree final slope on the rehabilitated site. So I had to verify that they'd achieved that slope as well. So yeah, I guess I can say I've had a little bit of time at site. Have
you had enough, or do you want more?
Hell no. Now I know that there's this new interesting niche. I want to get a piece of it. It sounds really exciting.
Yeah, for sure.
I've got a motorbike license too, I could say, and
there you go. Yeah, maybe you'll go reverse in your career. Start off conditioning and then end up doing awesome survey travel.
All right, I'm going to hit up your career section next.
Yeah.
No, I'll start twisting your arm. No.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that was amazing, Hayden. If people want to find out more, where can they go?
Yeah, CompassDataInc.com. They can email me, which my information is there. we have LinkedIn, we've got all the social media stuff, our archive of ground control points, which we've talked so briefly before today, which is good. It's fun because I don't know, get to know each other more in this format. But there's an archive of our ground control points that is on our database or on our website. And you can go there and you can view it, you can look at it, you can download a truncated version of it, and you can download it in KMZ or shapefile, and see all of the 80,000 points that we've surveyed around the globe that are in our database. So yeah.
Obviously, what I'm going to do next is replace the image behind me with, or add the control points to this bit of Atlanta behind me for the podcast. Each guest, I can build up the image.
Yeah, it might get too busy. I think you just keep it as is. Right. Perfect. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was, as I said, really amazing, really exciting, and great to have the podcast finally dip into the excitement and the adventure that is the surveying industry. So thanks for taking us there, Hayden.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And I really enjoyed this. Thanks.
Awesome.